Throughout the Second World War, many secret missions and operations were conducted with many different aims. Some were conducted by resistance to bring about the end of Hitler and Mussolini, and others were done to achieve military advancement. But there was one mission conducted by the infamous Waffen-SS commando Otto Skorzeny, who helped to liberate Mussolini from capture, which resulted in the executions of a number of German officers on a firing range. Operation Greif was a mission fought up by Hitler himself, and the aim of this was to capture a number of bridges before they were destroyed. Otto Skorzeny is considered a rather mysterious figure and was involved in other operations, but what is the story of the executions of Operation Greif? Remember to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Otto Skorzeny had become one of Adolf Hitler's reliable commandos and go-to men for secret operations. He had previously been involved in Operation Panzerfaust, a secret mission in which he oversaw the kidnapping and seizure of the son of Hungary's regent. When he returned to Hitler, he met with him at his Wolfslair headquarters on the 22nd of October 1944, and he received many accolades and congratulations, and he was briefed on the Ardennes offensive that Hitler planned to halt the Allied advancements. He was told that he was to be involved in a number of operations, but the main plan for him was to create a special brigade of soldiers called the Panzer Brigade 150, which would capture a number of bridges over the Meuse River. The aim was to take these before they could be blown up, and Hitler said that to allow this to be done quicker and with less losses, Skorzeny and his men would wear US Army uniforms that had been taken from soldiers. He said that having a small detachment of German soldiers in enemy uniform, it was believed would cause chaos with the enemy, and they could be hesitant to fire at what they believed was their own men. Hitler believed the Americans would be in disarray at seeing some of their own uniforms within the enemy, and Hitler said directly, "I want you to command a group of American and British troops and get them across the Meuse and seize one of the bridges. Not my dear Skorzeny, real Americans or British. I want you to create special units wearing American and British uniforms. They will travel in captured Allied tanks. Think of the confusion you could cause. I envisage a whole string of false orders which will upset communications and attack morale." But under the Hague Convention of 1907, this was considered rather controversial. Skorzeny and Hitler knew that if any of their soldiers were captured whilst in enemy uniform, then it was probable that they would be executed, being deemed as spies. Other field marshals discussed this point, but the order was given for the unit to wear American uniforms. But as the Ardennes offensive was beginning rapidly, Otto Skorzeny had only a short window of around 6 weeks to find his men for the job, and also to train them for Operation Greif. In the first 4 days of planning, he sent his plans for Panzer Brigade 150 to Alfred Jodl, and he asked for 3,300 men, and was then given the go-ahead whenever he was ready, and Jodl promised him all the support he needed. The OKW then issued an order asking for suitable soldiers for the operation who had a knowledge of the English language and also American dialect, and this note was passed to all the Wehrmacht's headquarters, and this was also leaked to the Allies. As well as having US Army uniforms, the brigade needed American vehicles, weapons and other equipment to successfully deceive. There would be no point a German soldier walking around in American uniform if they were sitting in Panthers with German Army markings on. They needed 15 tanks, 20 armoured cars, 20 self-propelled guns, 100 jeeps, 40 motorbikes, 120 trucks and more uniforms. They could not get all of this equipment and only had 2 Sherman tanks that were gathered battered, and Skorzeny then had to use German hardware decorated with American markings. The brigade had lots of Polish and Russian equipment also, and Skorzeny also had 10 men who spoke good English and had knowledge of the US lifestyle and turns of phrase. Around 150 men spoke relatively good English, but most spoke none. Because of this, the Panzer Brigade 150 was reduced from 3 battalions to 2, and the best 150 English speakers became part of a commando unit. 2,500 men were gathered, and the equipment they had was very underwhelming. The Panther tanks were disguised to look like M10 tank destroyers. Rumours began circulating in the brigade that they were to help relieve besieged French towns such as Dunkirk, and that they would capture Antwerp. But later the commanders were made aware of the plans to capture at least 2 of the bridges over the Meuse River at Huy, Ardennes and Amai before they could be blown up. The commandos of the group had little time to train, but were dressed in American uniforms, armed with American weapons and used US Army jeeps. They were given 3 missions. The first was that demolition squads of 6 men were to blow up bridges, ammunition dumps and fuel stores. The second was that recon patrols would watch both sides of the river and pass on fake orders to American units, and also remove minefield warnings. A third mission was that the lead commando groups would attack and disrupt the US chain of command, attacking telephone wires and radio stations. On the 14th of December 1944, Panzer Brigade 150 was gathered at Bad Münstereifel, and in the afternoon of the 16th they moved and advanced behind a number of attacking panzer divisions. They aimed to move around them, but following being halted, the mission in Skorzény's opinion was rather doomed. The following day he attended a conference and asked for his brigade to be used as a normal fighting detachment, and this was allowed. But on the 21st of December they tried to take the small village of Malmedy, and there were many assaults made by the brigade before they were fought back by the Americans. Skorzeny later talked about the plan after his surrender, and he said that a number of German soldiers did manage to infiltrate American lines, and one team even managed to get a US armed detachment to withdraw. Because of the deceit, the Americans started asking soldiers questions that they believed only Americans would know, and this included sports trivia, and some high-profile members of the American army were even later held at gunpoint for getting a question wrong. Otto Skorzeny's men had caused fear and had caused unease within the American ranks. With this, 44 German soldiers wearing American uniforms were sent through the American lines, and all but 8 came back initially. The Americans treated everyone with suspicion, but those who were captured were subject to execution as mentioned earlier, as they were wearing enemy uniforms. There was one massacre ordered by German General Anton Dosser in Italy, who ordered the executions of a number of American soldiers who had allegedly been caught wearing enemy uniforms, but this was not the case. The men who were captured by the Americans were shot dead and executed because of their accusation of being enemy spies. 3 named Panas, Schmidt and Billing were brought to a military trial at Henry Chapelle on the 21st of December 1944 and were then sentenced to death for their work in sabotage. 3 more Germans were tried and sentenced to death on the 23rd of December. 7 more were tried on the 26th of December, and 3 more were tried on the 31st. These were all found guilty, and were all sentenced to death to be executed. The executions of the men of Operation Greif occurred in a rather similar manner. They were all sentenced to death to be shot by firing squad, with the executioners being the US First Army. Firing squads were gathered, and in different areas makeshift firing ranges were made to execute the German saboteurs. In one execution of 3 German commandos, 3 wooden stakes were created against a small concrete building. The 3 men were led to their place of execution and were tied by the feet, and then their arms were tied behind their backs before they were secured by rope to the post. They were dressed in their clothes that they were captured in, then a mark was placed over their chests to show the firing squad where to aim. The men were then blindfolded, and the American military police who accompanied them stood back. Around 20 metres away stood the firing squads, who were armed with their rifles. They were then told to prepare and get ready, and when the signal was given, they shot straight into their targets, instantly killing the German soldiers who had been involved in Operation Greif. All of the men who were arrested and found in US Army uniform were sentenced to death and were executed in this manner, using firing squads. The team leader of Operation Greif, Gunther Schultz, was later tried in May 1945 and was then executed himself on the 14th of June 1945 by a firing squad of the US 9th Army. Otto Skorzeny was tried as a war criminal and was accused of violating the rules of war during the Battle of the Bulge. He and 9 officers of Panzer Brigade 150 were charged with improperly using US uniforms by entering into combat disguised therewith and treacherously firing upon and killing members of the armed forces of the United States. They were also accused of wrongfully obtaining US uniforms and Red Cross parcels, stealing those from prisoners of war. But the defendants were acquitted of their crimes, and with this Skorzeny escaped any further action. The executions of the men of Operation Greif were ultimately killed for their involvement in the deception attempts and the fact they were wearing enemy uniforms. They were all shot by firing squads made up of US soldiers, but the mastermind behind the whole operation escaped. Otto Skorzeny is a very interesting figure, and after the war he managed to escape from a prison camp and was eventually offered a job as a military advisor to the Egyptian president. He then became an advisor to Argentinian President Juan Perón, who allowed many former Nazis to settle in his lands after the Second World War, with scores of Nazi war criminals settling in Argentina. Skorzeny was later then apparently recruited by Mossad and conducted operations for them before he died in 1975. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.